Hey there, welcome to the first ever Soul Care with Mindy podcast. And I'm Mindy Caliguire, and this is a topic that has been deep in my heart for many, many, many years. And so today, this first episode ever, we'll share a little bit about my own story, why this topic matters so much, why we really decided this is now a good time to start entering into the world of podcasts. And so I'll also introduce to you a guest I have with me, a teammate here in the studio. And her name is Lacy Mason. And she is joining, she just flew in from LA last night. And you've been tracking with our work with Soul Care for has it been 3 years?
Yeah, at least.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Lacy, you'll hear more about her background. And I just love how you and I intersected, which was kind of fun. But just to give everybody a sense of what this podcast is for and what we hope it will accomplish in people's lives or serve as is a little bit of the context of why it was worth it for you to hop on a plane and for us to get this time together. Because we have really sensed in our work with Soul Care, with leaders, with organizations, with individuals all over the world, that there's a rising tide of the importance of this conversation. And so we're going to address some of that and why it's important. But say a little bit about yourself and what life in LA looks like for you, and then maybe about how you got connected to Soul Care.
Yeah, for sure. A little bit about myself. I live in Los Angeles with my husband of many years, almost 30 years now we've been together.
No one can believe that on our team.
I know. They make me feel so good. They're always like, how old are you? I love it. Our daughter is 25. She's a professional dancer in LA, and that is actually what brought us to move to LA. We're from Kentucky. We've been living in LA for about 10 years now, and love it. It's great. It's a crazy, busy city, obviously, but we just love the people and the creative energy and the diversity and all of the different things that are going on. And, you know, you've got the diversity of the landscape too, and the mountains and the beach and the city and all the things. So we've really enjoyed being there. But we met, well, we came across each other long before we actually met.
Mm-hmm. That's true. It's true.
Because I am a qualitative researcher and brand strategist. I've worked in the corporate world for about 20 years now, mostly working for Fortune 500 companies, doing research and strategy work to help them understand the people who they serve better, how to communicate better with people, what drives people's behavior, how to build better products, and also how to understand themselves as organizations better. And so I've done that work for a really long time. And along the way, I've had the opportunity to do really special projects for different organizations and ministries, which I had the opportunity to do many years ago for an organization that's in Chicago that I didn't know you were on the board for. So, yeah, so my research findings trickled down to you at the board level. So you were aware of my work, but we had never met. And then fast forward, many years later, here we are reconnected around soul care and soul health, and which is something that has become a more primary focus of my work about, I finished my master's in 2021, I think it was. I don't know. We were just talking about how COVID has erased our ability to process the passage of time. So I don't know. A few years ago, I finished my master's degree at Friends University in spiritual formation and leadership. And so since then, I've really been kind of, I still do a lot of corporate work, but I also have a primary focus now of working in spiritual formation and for formation organizations and ministries and churches and universities who care about those kinds of things. And so it's been really amazing, both in terms of like things that have happened for me in my journey, and then also the work that I feel like God is calling me to has really brought me to this intersection of where you're working and God has called you, and soul care as an organization. And so, so here we are.
It's been beautiful. It's been a beautiful gift. You personally, and then of course, having first been introduced to your work 20 or some years ago on that board, and seeing how those insights completely changed our way of addressing the work that we were doing. And so I've seen the power of that kind of an insight to shift what we do, methodology stuff. So that's been great. So I guess I should just back up and say a little bit about my own story and intersection, because you mentioned the program that you graduated from is spiritual formation and leadership. And you know that's for many years what I've said my deepest sense of calling has been, and the place I keep getting drawn into, both people and organizations, is that this intersection of spiritual formation and leadership. And sometimes those two are polarized topics. They don't play well with each other. I often refer to them as like I'm a translator between the jet fuel drinkers, the high capacity leaders that are running and gunning and leaping tall buildings in a single bound, all very missional, very committed to the cause, all good stuff. And I would be, you're one of those, I'm one of those. But then there's this other side that I, through a lot of pain, woke up to the need to care for my soul, not as something that if I had nothing better to do with my time, which never happens, which I think is how I would have thought of it before, but instead needed to become what I now think of as a first order priority. Some language from C.S. Lewis. But anyway, so those people, the spiritual formation people, are the candle lighters, right?
Yes.
They would have a table like this. They'd have a candle, and it would be lit. And maybe next time we'll have a candle.
We should, yes.
Because I'm all about the candles and the jet fuel. And it's this combination, this intersection where these two groups don't quite understand each other. They don't trust each other.
Speak the same language.
No, it's a totally different language. And yet and we'll talk more about this integration. The moment I think we are in globally is that the jet fuel people are burning out. They're exhausted. The mission increasingly becomes compromised that they care so very much about, not because they have bad strategy or bad methodology or anything, but just because the leaders in those organizations are just done. And so they don't have any language that makes them feel guilty. Like, how can, God is my everything. Like that we have a lot of scriptures that we can put around that, but it doesn't address the depth of need. So then the mission starts to be compromised, and people are trying to figure out, well, do I light a few candles? Like, what does that look like? So trying to get to a meaningful intersection of these two worlds has been a lot of certainly my personal story, but then how God has invited me into these conversations. And so part of the why did we want to start a podcast was this is a conversation that is happening in cities, in ministries, in organizations, in businesses, all over the world. And I end up sort of getting invited into a lot of these conversations where I'm having either very personal conversations about a leader's well-being, because that's like one part of this intersection is how are leaders doing and how can they arrange their lives around the well-being of their soul. But then there's questions that are organizational and strategic, and how are we leading so that our staff is well? We don't take on the responsibility of their soul care, but how do we create environments that are conducive to soul health? So anyway, those are the kinds of things that now we're like, wow, there are a lot of people talking about this, and you're one person that I love to sit in here, but that you now know many of these other people that we would bring into this conversation to broaden the stories, elevate these stories, elevate the sort of the friction points that come for leaders caring for their soul. And I think there's this rising tide of the importance of the conversation, but there's also a sort of the underlying admission of how low it can feel, how hard it can feel when you can't make sense of your faith and what you're called to the things that worked 10, 20 years ago somehow aren't anymore. And I know I'll say more about my own story when we were church planting and stuff, but I know that sort of things aren't working was a little bit part of your story. Do you mind if I kind of put you on the spot and ask if you would share some of that?
Sure, yeah. I think my story, as I've shared it with some of these, people who you're talking about, who I've come to know over the past several years, it always strikes me, it's not surprising, but I'm always struck by how many similarities there are in the challenges. And kind of, even though we're all coming from different directions, we often end up in a similar place based on the challenges of what it's like to manage the realities of being really engaged in your work and the things that you feel called to and the opportunities that you have and the desire to build or make or produce. And how that energy, which is good, when it's not shepherded and cared for in a way in terms of caring for our own selves, how that energy can start to shift into something very different over time.
Yeah.
And you start to feel it little by little, but then before you know it, it's sort of taken on this whole new experience in yourself. And then you find yourself feeling very different. We're calling it burnout most of the time, but it's really complex and has a lot of different manifestations in our lives. And so, anyway, sorry, you were going to say something. I kept going, but did you have a?
Well, I was hold the explanation of some of those symptoms, because we would think of those as different symptoms. And you're right, it's a way broader topic than. It's easy to slap the word burnout on there, but there's a lot more going on, and you're learning that more and more. I was realizing I hadn't made the connection that when you and I intersected 3 years ago, we were at the point as an organization of trying some interventions into organizations to try to say, what if we took a staff team and brought them through some experience to try to re-envision this care of the soul, the spiritual vitality in the midst of work. But one of the things that was so important in the design of that intervention was to know, did our help? Like, you can create content, and I've done it. You can push things out there and hope that they're helpful, but you shouldn't necessarily equate engagement or somebody doing a thing with whether or not it made a difference. And so when I found out that you were just finishing this program, that you were interested in work that was more directly connecting your skill set, which is substantial, with your calling that felt it was emerging in this realm, you came in and actually you've done, how many interviews you have done probably nearly 100 or more interviews with people that are part of our ecosystem. And so you've done this world-class qualitative research on behalf of the care of the soul for leaders' soul health. And so when you're starting to talk about what you hear and what are the nuanced edges of, say, burnout, that'll be, we're going to, on another whole separate conversation, dive into one of our specific projects that we did with you. But with that context, like, now that maybe folks would know that you've done a lot of these deep conversations with people, and you get their trust, and then they tell you stuff. It's obviously very confidential. You never disclose their names, but you listen deeply and you care about their actual words. What are some of the things you're hearing about, like, what is hard right now?
Yeah. Well, like I was saying before, I'm always struck at the similarities. Emotionally, people are, just in general, we're more similar than we are different, which is kind of a tenet of qualitative research, it sort of helps us be able to sort through things. But in hearing people's stories, I hear my own story. And in hearing my story, they hear their story. You know, there's just a lot of resonance there in terms of, you know, having this deep desire, like I was saying, to create and to build and to have impact, and to do that even, you know, on behalf of the kingdom, right? You know, like we see ourselves as co-laborers with God. And so, you know, there's a lot of motivation and energy around that. But then in some time, in certain circumstances, however the paths are that lead us to this place, we start to feel a sense of this isn't working anymore. Something's not right. This deep exhaustion is there that many of us, I think, like I always talk about it, that for all these years I've just had a gear that I could just drop down into. And I knew I was doing it, you know, when I consciously knew I was doing it. I'm beyond the point of exhaustion, but I have this gear that I can drop down into, and it's just push through.
Yeah.
You know, it's the one where I'm sitting at O'Hare Airport, getting on a plane to go to China to do a big research project. And I feel internally in my body and my soul, emotionally, I don't think I can do this. Like, I'm so tired, and I can't access the kind of energy and motivation that I had before. But I got to get on this plane. I can't say, I changed my mind. I'm not right. I'm going to go home and go to bed, you know. So you drop down into that gear and you push through it. Well, you can keep doing that for a while, until then your body starts to say, no. Yeah. You know.
Well, you know, that's what happened to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have found that so fascinating in your story too. I didn't have quite the, you know, the level of physical manifestation that you had, and you know, I'll let you talk about that, but it's there, you know.
Yeah, I hear that story repeated a lot. And I think that's a really valuable way of framing the, like, dropping down to a gear that just allows you to keep pushing, because that's what we do. And thank God that gear's there. There are times when we have to show up, and it's, but if we don't have a way of life that's counterbalancing ability to reach for that gear and continuing to build our reserves over time, then anyway, so yeah, for me, that was when my husband and I were church planting in Boston many, many years ago, almost 30 some years ago now. And my symptoms, like, I probably had, if I had been more self-aware, I might have been able to admit, I'm dirt tired. I don't have any more to give. I didn't have, all I knew was, you got to just keep pushing. There's, you know, you got to handle this and this and this project, and there's a small group that needs to get spun up, and this, all the finances need to be taken care of, and just the stuff.
Just simple stuff of church planning.
Just simple stuff, right? Like, it's no big deal. And I've written about this. I'm happy to ever share my story about it, but it is so bewildering, and it was for me when I ended up with physical neurological symptoms that landed me in the hospital a couple of times over a period of months. And I was like, you know, like, hey, God, I'm on your team. This isn't strategic. What gives? Like, I'm not getting the things done. It took me such a long time, Lacey, to get to the wake-up call of, there is something deeply flawed in my way of being that that God cares about, that God wanted to meet me in, that in the end would completely change my ability to go and do and serve and love and give and lead. but I was doing it out of deficit. I was grinding. And you cannot give out of a vacuum. It doesn't work in physics, and it doesn't work in us as well. So for me, that season of being, a season of forced rest, of being completely sidelined, I was incapacitated, bedridden basically for months. And, what was coming to my mind? I was like, do I want to say that? Yeah. Like, okay. So I would look down and be like, my fingernails are nice and long the way you would want. I'm losing weight. Like, this is supposed to be the ideal for women in the mid 90s. And it's like, I was like, I don't ever want this. God, I want my life back. I want my life back. And I don't ever want to be consumed with those things that are not what matter, that I was, gaining some world, but forfeiting my soul. So anyway, that is what was the wake up call for me to the idea of soul care. And I had no structured, I had no path. God just so graciously brought mentors and friends and authors who were giving me language for what was happening. They were giving me permission to maybe not do all the things on my list and just rest. They were giving me practices that were completely different than what I had been thinking of as what counted as my quiet time or whatever, and pathways, start here and here's the next thing. And so these were some of the things that these people brought into my life, not as a structured set of sequenced things, but just as the Lord brought help. But I was uniquely open to it in a way that I'm sure prior to that I might not have been. So anyway, that is what brought me into this topic of soul care. And then the healthier I got, the crazy thing was more and more opportunities came along to help other people with this message. And so now 30 years on, this is my full-time work. And I'm loving it. It's such a joy. And so our organization has been growing, and you've been a big part of it, and others as well. It's just been really sweet to see. So, where would we want to go from here? What do you think would be valuable to chat through so that people would have a sense of kind of I still think I want to hear, because I know I've talked to you after you've done these interviews, and you have seared into your mind, into your heart, the kinds of phrases that you've heard that, yes, maybe we're more common than we are different, but what are the words that people are saying who are maybe like me back then, this isn't strategic, God. I can't even think that I should be caring for myself. I'm just still only concerned about the work getting done.
I think it's particularly tricky for people who are working in ministry context, whether that's in the church or in missions or in relief and development or, NGOs, any kind of nonprofit. You have the added complexity of, it's a beautiful complexity. There's nothing negative about it, but it's an added layer of, again, co-laboring with God, feeling the honor of that very deeply, and the desire to bring about the kingdom and now, serving people and helping people and being the hands and feet of Christ. When we really lean into that, as is we are invited to, if we don't have a sense of orientation in terms of how much of this work is mine and how much of it is actually God's, it can start to get a little muddled, a little tangled up. And that pressure can start to build where we start to, I don't know, I'm making up this ratio, but if it's 80% God, 20% us, right? It can start to get a little muddled where that starts to shift a little, and it starts to feel more and more like it's 80% us and 20% God, right?
Think of the audacity of me telling God what is and is not strategic. Sorry, God, the work must get done. This is not strategic having me sit in my bed all day.
Yeah, right.
And how the absurdity. But that was actually my attitude.
Yeah.
Because what mattered most was the work, and I obviously was critical path to that work getting done.
Right. Well, what matters most is the work, right? Mm-hmm. What matters most is that, people are fed, people come to meet Jesus, people, that
are released from sex trafficking.
Absolutely.
And there's so many very dire situations.
The urgency is not manufactured, it's real. Mm-hmm. In the corporate world, there's a lot of urgency as well and pressure, but I think it's a little more manufactured, right?
It's not true life and death.
Right. We gotta, we need to hit some numbers. We need to hit revenue goals, things like that. In ministry for leaders, there's this additional complexity of, and maybe this would be true even, in healthcare, right? Or, helping professions, right? Teaching even. Your work is impacting people in the immediacy of their real lives very directly, right? And this pressure can start to build where we sort of slip out of that abiding posture and into kind of more of a striving posture without even really realizing it.
Totally. Well, and some of our leadership language actually kind of reinforces all this. And we do take the pressure on ourselves. And that's why the nuance in these things matters a ton. So how we speak about these things with acknowledgement of the scriptural mandates to go and to serve and to all those things. But also, I found some of the leadership contexts I was in would somewhat conveniently ignore what Jesus's patterns of life were. What were Jesus's ways of handling that 80-20 or whatever it is, 100-100? How are we actually, even in our leadership, modeling our pattern, our way of life after a very balanced, it would seem, expression of great intensity at times, great urgency, and great peace and withdrawal. And, we can assume lightheartedness and things that weren't all about, the grave, dire situation in the world, So I think, there's a lot we get to explore together. I'm so glad to have you here. I keep wanting to press in further about your own, how did you go from being a qualitative researcher who was traveling to China and everywhere else around the world to deciding to go take a degree in spiritual formation and leadership?
Yeah, there's a lot that I know now that I didn't know then. And we talk a lot at Soul Care about the idea of flourishing and the different dimensions that are part of that, and you can sort of slice and dice those dimensions of flourishing in different ways. We have 5 that we kind of work with. You could go up to 12, depending on which study you're looking at and who's referencing that. But anyway, at its basic, level, we talk about different aspects of flourishing in terms of relational, vocational, financial, mental, physical, and spiritual, right? If I had taken our soul health assessment then 5 years ago, 10 years ago, however many years ago, there would have been a lot of red. On those results.
Well, just for reference, that's an assessment that's available at soulcare.com. We've had thousands and thousands, many thousands of people who have taken it. And the result ranges are in healing, strengthening, and flourishing. So I'm glad you brought up flourishing. And you would have been in that healing zone.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I knew that I knew things were changing. I knew there was a sense of dis-ease, a lack of wellness. I knew I was having a really hard time, but I didn't have language to really talk about it. I didn't have sort of a conceptual understanding of what was happening myself in my interior. And spiritually, I had this this sense of like, there's got to be more to this than what I know there's more to this.
And for context, you were a devoted, church attending, quiet time having, like
Bible reading, praying. Yes.
Right. So the something more wasn't like, oh, I need a relationship with Jesus.
No. It was like, I feel like I'm missing something here.
Yeah.
There's a deeper connection that I'm just missing. So kind of similar to what you were saying, there was reading and authors and like a trail of, breadcrumbs that I'm like following, where I'm learning more and more at that time about like, oh, there is sort of this this aspect of discipleship that I feel like I have not really been introduced to yet. Mm. And little by little, it's sort of these authors and books and, thought leaders that I feel like God was leading me to, right? Yeah. But I was starting to discover the concept of spiritual formation, contemplative practices, those kinds of things. So I got really jazzed about that, and I'm just one of those people I'm a student and I love learning, and I would be in a degree program perpetually if I could, much to my husband's. He's very supportive, but also he's like, what is this one? What are we going to do with this? But anyway, so I discovered this master's program in spiritual formation at Friends University. And it's so funny when I think about the decision to do this. I always say I never thought about anything less in my life. I was like,
that's substantial.
Yes, I will that.
Because we're good at overthinking things.
Oh, absolutely. But there was just something that I was like, I know this is where I want to be focusing.
Yeah.
So in the midst of all of this deep burnout and kind of vocational tension, and this sort of spiritual desert that I felt like I was in, God kind of brings me into that space, and it was like drinking fresh water, living water. It just really, it almost immediately started to reinvigorate me.
Isn't that beautiful?
And so I stayed in that, I finished that program, learned so much about myself and how to start identifying false narratives and some challenging theology and the absence of practices and things like that were really contributing to that just overall sense of deficit that I was feeling in my life. And it really is interesting. I like how soul care has identified that kind of struggling result on the assessment as healing, because that's really truly what it is. Like it's not like oh, I'm broken and I can't be fixed. It's an acknowledgement of like, oh, there's so much space and opportunity for healing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what absolutely was happening for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, as you think back on what that was like for you and like what daily life is like for you now, like you still have a life. You were telling me crazy stories. You're up till 2 a.m. working with a client's thing that was urgent. Like you still have urgency.
Yeah.
You still have high demands. You still have pressing engagements that are life-giving, but also demanding. How would you say your life is now, having been on this journey of caring for your soul, spiritual formation in the midst of your calling?
I think it is about like being able to operate with a different set of motivations and a different set of narratives kind of driving under the surface, that are less about me feeling like I have to kind of make things happen, and my identity being all tangled up in my performance and my achievement and my career, and much and this is we are still learning and healing. This is not like I have perfected the practice of this. Yeah. But being able to sort of operate with this this different motivation of, this is God's work. I get to be present with it, but it is not. It's not as much about me.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of like, I think I have a lot more freedom now to do the work, but without sort of absorbing it into my identity in such a way that it's not who I am anymore. It's still a big part of my life.
It's a paradox that you are actually more yourself,
yes,
more free to be who you actually are.
Yeah.
But you're not shouldering the weight.
Yes.
In the same way. And so I observe that in you. I observe that kind of freedom that is authentic with whatever the struggle of the day might be. And yes, we're all still healing in different areas, but for the most part, I encounter you as someone who's really radiant and flourishing in those senses that we were talking about. Not that we're not still in process. We always are. And
absolutely,
some new thing comes down the road. But now we have tools and language to address a thing that comes along the way. And so, yeah, thanks for your authenticity there. I appreciate it always. I look forward to, in a future conversation with you, diving into some of the research more specifically, because again, your keen ability to listen and then consolidate, and there's a word you have for that when you bring it all together.
Synthesize.
I'm like, what is that word? Yeah, your synthesizing of these conversations has been so insightful, and I'm delighted to have. Our team is so blessed. We love anytime you just did a team gathering a couple weeks ago, and you zoomed in to give us a readout on some of the latest discoveries that you're having, and it's just been such a blessing to have. So I hope that folks who listen in to our Soul Care podcast will be able to locate themselves somewhere in this journey of, I hope not deep burnout, but if that's where you're at, then that's where you're at, and that's fine. You can be there. But to know that healing is available, and wherever you are in this journey, maybe you are flourishing, but you're saying, how do I take this further? How do I help others with this? And not out of a driven place, but out of the overflow of what God's doing in your life. And so God willing, we're going to have lots of great guests here who will be similarly sharing their stories, maybe their insights as well on how they're living a life of a healthy soul in the midst of their leadership. Or how they're leading for formation in their organizational context. And so I'm jazzed. This is our first podcast. I don't know. How do you think we did?
Well, I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I'm excited too, and I'm grateful to be here with you always, and just to know you and get to be in this work with you.
It's fun.
So it's
fun. More often than not, Lacey will be joining us because I feel you'll be a bit of a co-host with me in this. And as we were talking about it, we'd love to experiment with like a closing moment, a closing practice, maybe a scripture that we would offer. So as you've been listening, maybe you felt some resonance with Lacey's journey or my journey, or maybe a flicker of hope that it doesn't have to be as hard as maybe it has been. And I want to encourage you in that hope. You have every reason to hope that. This is a well-worn path.
It is.
Historically, for centuries, but is a little bit more elusive in our modern, highly distracted context. So we're excited to join you in this conversation. And I don't know, would we just have just some silence and a little bit of surrendering? I think that's what I'd like to do. So if you're driving, don't shut your eyes. But if it's available to you, maybe, and if you feel so inclined, maybe just join us I'll just have a few seconds of silence, and then I'll guide us through a little bit of prayerfulness, and then we'll be done. So let's just enter in. First, I'd invite you to think back on this conversation. Maybe you only heard a small clip. Maybe you heard the whole thing. But was there something that just you thought, ooh, that's me today? Or someone you really care about? And so we would just invite you to hold yourself or that person that you care so much about just before God. Like right now, God is as near as your breath, right here, right now. Bring yourself to God's immediate presence with you. Can you take a breath? And then can you take another breath? And then whatever maybe today is the thing that is most irksome or frightening or serious. And can you just lay it, sort of figuratively lay it before God? That may be hard. That may be, you might be like throwing it at his feet, like, here, take it. I'm so done. But let's honor that moment and let's just say, God, have your way. Thank you that you hold the things that are beyond our ability. I don't think you ever designed us to shoulder the things that many of us have been shouldering. And God, would you use these conversations that we'll be having in this format for your purposes, to meet the very real spaces that people are living and invite them into this freedom that Lacey's been talking about and that we've experienced. So in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.